Hello and welcome to Snide's Return, a tabletop roleplay podcast. My guest today knows how to navigate across time, space, and places of even greater design. What power they wield to take on titans, face down giants, and spare an entire pantheon at their whim. No stranger to the tabletop role-playing game community, their star shines brightest as though they have made all others disappear before our eyes. Going to the end of the world to bring us closer to each other is Games Master, podcaster, game designer, streamer, and community champion, Connie Chang. Connie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. What an introduction. Wow. I feel like I can't even live up to what you're putting down. Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and that's all your work reworded. That is none of my effort. I've just put it in interesting sentences. So stepping into and as a stepping off point for some of the things I mentioned there in the intro, Connie, how did you get into tabletop role-playing games, please?
I love it whenever I'm asked this question because I always say the same thing but worded kind of differently, and I feel like I always discover new things about myself whenever I answer this question from someone else. So the cold, hard, dry, ugly facts of the matter is I got into TTRPGs through Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Specifically, I GM'd a home game for my high school friends back in, I want to say like 2015, 2016 maybe. I remember it was the year out of high school. And I just remember thinking like, hey, this D&D thing's starting to get popular. Like, we're odd nerds. We like video games. We're into roleplay. Like, why not give this a shot? So I started a home game, and it went as disastrously chaotic as you might imagine for my baby's first ever D&D game, right? That I was also the DM for. And that was a lot of fun. And I just kept playing D&D after getting into college. I had a pretty consistent home campaign in college that went on for, I want to say, like 2 years. Junior and senior years of undergrad. And that was a lot of fun. Got to sort of see players through level 1 through like 12, which was really, really awesome. And after that, after college, after graduation, started to transition into a more, I think, like serious hobbyist relationship with TTRPGs, expanding into different kinds of systems, not just D&D. And yeah, really putting myself out there and meeting new and awesome folks through Twitter and through other online spaces such as yourself, Adam.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything you're doing in the community at the moment. I want to backtrack just a little bit. The home game, this sort of epic game you had running for 2 years and the experiences you had before, were you using published setting materials or was this sort of homebrew home game?
That's a good question. It was a completely homebrew campaign, which is part of the reason why it was so chaotic. I remember like sitting down with like, the source books and being like, ooh, like what monsters do I want to use? Like what plot hooks do I want to throw in there? And I decided, you know what? I'm going to homebrew it. I'm going to come up with my own. And the first ever home campaign I ran for my friends in high school, the hook was this magical, like corruptive mist, right? Had like settled over this like homebrew fantasy realm and had settled over this realm for like dozens of years, right? And like humanity and elf kind, dwarf kind, whatever was completely wiped out. So the last bastion of peoplehood resided in the peak of this mountain range called Siren Song, right? The very peak that used to be this remote, hospitable place, but due to the magical corruptive mist has become, the last bastion of humanity and civilization's like last hope, right? And the hook for the beginning of the campaign is over the months, the mists have been slowly rising and will surely take over Siren Song unless 4 intrepid adventurers are sent into the mists with gas masks on a flying ship. This was pre-COVID, so I was like, oh, we can't breathe the air? That's fine. That's a fine plot point to throw at my players without warning, right? And yeah, they got to meet all sorts of really messed up monsters. I threw in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. At the time, I had no idea what safety tools were, right? Like I didn't do lines or veils. I didn't have any safety tools at the table. And my players, honestly, they were just like, we wanted to make horny bar jokes. We wanted to meme. We wanted to have like a silly campaign with like tavern wenches. Instead, I was like, here is a Barogara and it's going to rip you limb from limb, right? And it's going to spawn out of the mist and be a reflection of your greatest nightmares. Like have fun, right? So that was a really interesting first GMing experience for me. And I think it says a lot about me as a person.
Wow, yeah, definitely. And Siren Song clearly lulling some to their doom and others out to recover for others. So how much of that inspired what into what has become Transplanar and the world that is inhabited in your show?
That's a great question. So you did such an amazing introduction for my work and what I do. Again, thank you, Adam. But for any listeners who might be unaware or new to what Transplanar is, it's the actual play show that I GM and produce and direct for. In a nutshell, we're an all transgender POC-led D&D actual play stream. We stream Saturdays at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time. The world is Andake, which is a completely homebrew, non-colonial, anti-Orientalist world, right? All of the cultures that I like base a lot of these like fantasy nations off of are taken from like various AAPI cultures, of which I belong to as well. And it was very important to me and is important to me that the world building reflects the diversity of cultures that there are in the actual world, and that those cultures are represented with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of thought and care. So with that out of the way, our campaign is currently, I describe it as grimdark and gritty fantasy because it is. The premise of it is episode 1, right? The world ends. Right, the stars wink out, the gods disappear, like clerics lose their power, right? Some warlocks lose their power as well. Paladins who draw their oath from divinity also lose their power. And these strange chittering aberrations begin to spawn in this new darkness, right? They begin to attack people. So that's just like the basic hook of episode 1. And I think, you know, you can sort of chart a progression of like Connie's interested in gritty stuff to Connie's still interested in gritty stuff, right? So that for me like hasn't changed at all. I'm someone who's, as a GM and as a storyteller, I'm really interested in stories about like grief and tragedy and loss, and grittiness, right? But I'm interested in them because of the hope that can emerge, right? In the aftermath of tragedy, right? Like after something horrible happens, so much incredible beauty is possible, right? And I'm also really interested in asking and exploring what it means to have power, both in terms of like magic power actualized in fantasy settings, but also in terms of like, you know, social and situational power, right? And what power reveals of us. I think there's like a very common I would say misconception when it comes to world building that some, you know, folks might have that power in and of itself is corruptive, right? Like you give someone power and it corrupts them and they get greedy with it and they do terrible things with it, right? But I think power is more revelatory than corruptive, right? Because once you have power, I think it reveals it doesn't corrupt. And I'm interested in exploring a lot of these through Transplanar. And I think I was kind of subconsciously exploring some of these themes and topics through my first ever homebrew, like home campaign. But now I've like grown a lot as a GM. I've gotten to like meet so many different people and learn from them. And I think that I'm a lot more intentional with my world building and with my like encounter design and with like the hooks I throw at my players.
Yeah, absolutely. The show's into the 4th arc, 15 episodes per arc.
Yes.
I'll touch on a plot point for the current arc in a moment, but how far from that grit and darkness have we gone into light and back, or have we stayed in that darkness with little bits of levity? How have the characters dealt with the world that you have created for them?
Well, first of all, Adam, honestly, kudos to you for doing your research because I feel like you know more about my show than I do based on what you've said, and I'm kind of intimidated. Like, ooh, am I going to get quizzed about my own show?
No,
but that's, I mean, I'm down. Quiz me anytime you want. But to answer your question, it's a great one. You're full of great questions and great zingers, Adam. The characters are really the heart of it, right? Because everything I set up, it's important to me that the narrative of Transplanar has a satisfying conclusion and a satisfying outcome. Because unlike a home game where I can just sort of throw things at my players and be like, figure out what happens, for an actual play where that difference is for me as a GM is I prep things a little bit more. And it's important that like things make sense dramaturgically and also like things that I set up pay off. Right. So it's not like I set this, you know, interesting NPC up for 3 sessions and they never come back. Right. Whereas in a home game that might happen like all the time. Right. But I make sure everything pays off in one way, shape, or form. So with that aside, moments of levity, I think, are mostly found through the characters because my PCs will like crack jokes or like their characters will respond in really realistic ways to like terrible things happening. I'll describe like a horrible, salivating, slobbering monster and my PC will be like, well, that's great. You know, and like they'll have like we'll have like banter at the table that will make it fun. And I think that's just an organic part of performing with people that you like and people that you are really comfortable with, right? But I would say Transplanar is a mostly dramatic series. Not gonna lie, it's pretty serious, but there are moments of levity for sure.
So sticking with this a little bit longer, during the series as you have presented it and all the payoffs you put through, has there been a time in from episode 1 to where we are now chronologically? Has there been a moment in particular that has touched you personally, emotionally, where you've bought into the character's story in a deeper way, or there has been a revelation from them that you weren't expecting, maybe?
Yeah. My PCs, oh my goodness. My players always bring the fire, they bring the thunder, right? Like I give them the sky and they give me a storm, and it's beautiful to witness. The most recent example I can think of is one of my characters, V Noxerzo, who's played by Erica Flayland. V is a elven sorcerer. She's a con woman. That's her backstory, right? She's traveled all of Andake, just conning people left and right, swindling them of their money, and skipping town when the guards come. And I really wanted V's backstory and like her past exploits to kind of, bite her in the butt, especially in this arc, right? The premise of this arc is my players are currently in Tulong, which is the kingdom of Tulong. And after the cataclysm, after the apocalypse occurs, basically, the emperor of Tulong set up this like magical ward around the borders of her kingdom called the Dream Shield. So anyone who tries to enter and hurt Tulong or Tulong's interests get trapped in the Dream Shield, which is this sort of like never-ending like sleepwalking slumber, right? So players had to get through the Dream Shield. They eventually got into Dokao, which is the capital of Tulong. And Erica has DM'd me before this arc started being like, V is, has a lot of history in Dokao. Like she's definitely conned people there before. And outside of arc 4, we actually played a one-shot with some guest players that we were able to bring in through this awesome event called Shoot Your One Shot that I'll get into in a minute if we have time, where we played through some of V's backstory in Dokao, where we learned that V had a fiance, like a girlfriend that she was like really in love with. They were going to get married, right? But at the end of the one shot, like this girlfriend was called Lotus. V bargained away her memory of Lotus to achieve a treasure. Because her whole thing is she's like driven by treasure, right? But she thought, okay, I'll just bargain away like a memory of like a single kiss with Lotus, right? But what I ended up doing was like I told her, well, you forget her completely. Like you feel like this memory of your girlfriend just like vanish from your mind, right? And V was like, great, I'm excited for arc 4 now because Lotus is still there, right? So yeah, Lotus is still there. V met Lotus again, and I threw those memories back at V. It was really fun. Couple of episodes where V was like looking at this tiefling bartender who's like glowering daggers at her because Lotus thought V just like left her, skipped town, right? With no call, no showed her, right? So there was like this like reunion. And I remember one moment in this reunion where Erica describes V as pacing around the floor of this tavern that Lotus owns. The memories come flooding back, and she just sort of improvised off the cuff, like, this squeaky floorboard. I remember it now. It still squeaks, doesn't it? And here, like where I etched my name on the stool, I remember it. And I was just like blown away with the little details that Erica had V say, right? Like these little things of like, because that's what really matters in a relationship, right? It's the little things that you care about, like the way they laugh, or like how, their smile only really happens on one side of their face, or like their favorite drink, right? Or this like silly little inside joke you had. So that was a really devastating scene to play out. And also a very warm, fuzzy scene to play out. And also a complicated one because V was dating someone else at the time, and her girlfriend at the time was also there. So there was all sorts of drama as well.
Many layers of things going on in that scene, absolutely.
For sure.
Definitely you've got me hooked. And while we have hopefully other listeners hooked, where can we find your good self and everything you're associated with Transplanar on social media, on the internet, so we can get people down to those links in the description below to sort of go and support you and everything you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me personally on Twitter, Patreon at by Connie Chang. That's BYCONNIECHANG. And you can find Transplanar at Transplanar, which is trans as in transgender, TRANS, and then planar as in like interplanar travel, right? PLANAR, and then the letters RPG. We're most active on Twitter in terms of social media, and we also stream Saturdays on Twitch.
Yeah, so scroll down, support Connie and Transplanar using the links below this podcast. Connie, with the stream, the podcast, the producing, and sort of everything, how do you find time to do other projects?
I don't really, but I do. I don't know how. It's some sort of like techno wizardry. Maybe I've forged a pact with a dark patron, and that's how I find extra hours in a day. But yeah, it's a constant, I think, renegotiation of my schedule and a constant assemblage of my priorities, and making sure that, you know, I'm investing the time in the places that I want, first of all, want to invest the time in, which is TTRPG stuff, because it's my passion. It's what I love to do. And also the stuff I'm able to, right? And the stuff that pays. So it's like those three things that I have to constantly sort of juggle, and they vary on like a month to month basis, right? So in terms of just like how I juggle things logistically, I guess that's sort of a little peek into my brain.
Yeah, well, you've appeared in some fantastic streams. Into the Mists. I was scrolling through your Twitter, full of fantastic content. Again, link in the description below. But you've done streams with Abria, Gabe, Omega Jones, and many fantastic sort of celebrities as they are within our community. What's it been like to sort of come into and share the stage and be on par, if not, stood, you can stand on a pedestal if you wish, up on this pedestal? People want to be as successful, they want to be as creative, they want to be as free flowing. So how has it been sort of being part of this community, or the TTRPG community?
I wouldn't even consider myself to be, like, it's always so odd, and it feels odd and interesting. And I think it's very humbling whenever folks, come up to me and are interested in interviewing me and are interested in picking my brain, like you. And I always feel very like honored when folks reach out to me and want to talk with me. And I definitely don't see myself as like on a pedestal at all. Like, I'm just a nerd here, like running nerd games with my friends who are also nerds, right? And that is still very much the heart of what I do. I feel very privileged and very lucky to have been given the opportunities to get to, be on those stages with those folks. Like, getting to play with and also GM Abria Yengar has been amazing. Like, she's awesome. Like, Abria, if you're listening to this, you're great. You're awesome. I hope to one day meet you in person. And that is both a promise and a threat. And, like Gabe's Hicks, and Omega Jones, Critical Bard, they're both wonderful, incredible, very talented performers. And they just shine a light wherever they go. Gabe is also such a talented game designer. And he's always like tweeting about like, comes up with these like campaign ideas and these like item ideas. And I'm just like, where do you have the time to come up with this stuff? And I just know that it's organic. That's just how Gabe is. Like, they're just a naturally creative person and like a naturally very warm person, very talented, right? And like CB is the same way, like such a talented streamer, like an incredible cosplayer, and a very, very talented vocalist and singer and musician as well. Yeah. And yeah, like getting to GM Christina Ariel was also amazing. Like, she just like the thoughtfulness that she, brings to her work. And I just had admired her for such a long time that it was a dream come true to get to GM her in that way. And I know I'm not really answering your question. I'm just sort of gushing about people that I like in the space.
That kind of is answering the question, to be fair.
Yeah, there's just so many amazing, bright, and talented stars in the TTRPG community that I just want to get to play and GM all of them. I want to get to play with and share a table and space with, all the amazing, talented people out there. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've been able to have in that regard so far.
Well, you've also created products for people like myself and other DMs, GMs to bring to our own tables, available through Itch, and you've also got God Killers or God Killer.
Ooh, yes.
So what can you tell us about some of your works ready for release. I mentioned there's some things on itch, and the future forthcoming, exciting because I like the way it sounds, God Killer RPG.
Ooh, okay, let's talk about the stuff that's already out before getting into God Killer, because I'm
Yeah,
very
please.
excited about God Killer. So thank you for bringing up my itch, Adam. On itch, I currently have 3 things out, which I know, like, compared to some other game designers, is like a nothing. But my creative process is, I think, very slow and very methodical, right? Like, I'm always like, I have to sit down and think about something for a long time before putting it out, because having something out that's reflects, I think, my own standards and my own like approach to quality is really important to me. So it takes me a while to churn stuff out. That out of the way, I have 2 modules out. One of them is called roleplay, I believe, and it's basically like a role-playing module. It's system agnostic. You can sort of throw it in, like, if you're running D&D or Pathfinder or Masks or anything. If you have any sort of like downtime or like a travel montage, or like it's a new table and like, or like the characters are new but the players aren't new to each other, whatever, you can throw that in there, and it basically is like a series of prompts and some loose rules to help guide the role, the scene that comes out of those prompts, right? I was inspired by Starcrossed, which is a system that uses Jenga blocks to tell a story of 2 star-crossed lovers with 2 players, right? And you pull blocks from the Jenga tower until it, collapses, and that's when the game ends, right? But instead of utilizing a Jenga tower, I just sort of have like a series of, you roll a D100, and you land on like a prompt table, right? And you, 2 characters get to have a scene with each other around that particular prompt. And it, helps encourage role playing, right? And world building and characters getting to know each other. You can even do this with NPCs, right? You don't have to pick another PC to play with. And this is, I have found it useful. I developed it during Arc 1 of Transplanar, when my players were starting to get to know each other, and we were doing some like travel montages that I was like, we should learn how to fill the time here, right? That isn't just like travel and then you get there, right? Because I'm personally not a fan of random encounters. So this was sort of my response to that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You've also got on there, you mentioned your process, your design process being slow and methodical, and ironically have released accelerated combat for D&D. So would you mind taking us through that? Because I know from personally, I love D&D, but the bit that is a sticking point for me is initiative and combat. I love combat, but it can accelerated combat, please, from the expert.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because accelerated combat is a module specifically for D&D 5th edition. It's a way to do combat if you feel like Adam sometimes and you're like, this combat is taking forever. We have spent 2 like sessions, which is like 3 in real world months, right? Fighting a single troll, like a series of trolls. Can we please just finish fighting these trolls, right? So accelerated combat is my response to, I think, non-boss encounters, right? Like fights that aren't like built up to in a certain way, either like random encounters or non-random encounters that make sense, like bandits guarding like a bandit like outpost, right? But there's like 20 bandits and 7 players. That's gonna take forever. If you run combat like rules as written, that will take forever, especially if you track each bandit individually and don't group them together, use swarm mechanics or minion mechanics or something, right? So accelerated combat is my response to that. It's for combat on the road, a new way to handle random encounters, or a way to just speed up regular combat. 3 main roles and boom, that's it. You narrate what happens together as a group. You figure out consequences based on how the roles go, and it helps you like focus on the cinematic side of combat. Like players can feel really badass with like just 1 or 2 roles, right? And it speeds things up and it makes it feel a lot more narratively driven. It's been a hot minute since I've released accelerated combat, and I kind of want to release like an addendum to it, or like a second version that might be like combat for actual play or something. Because something I've also noticed as an actual play GM watching other actual plays of Dungeons and Dragons is combat can slow stuff down like immensely, right? The rolling of the dice, like the arbitration of rules, like counting the squares if you're using a battle map, or like going through reading the text of like how spells work. That stuff can really slow down, I think, an actual play campaign in a way that isn't necessarily very interesting for the audience to watch. And I've got like a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas about how to run combat in a way that's a lot faster and a lot more gripping, both for the players and for the audience. So that's currently in the works as well.
Yeah, I think with respect to sort of actual plays and streams and things like that, as you mentioned, for audience engagement, I think that's where, and again, this isn't to put down on D&D, but like the Powered by the Apocalypse system, where it has a more flowing narrative style, can really keep that engagement a little bit easier, and definitely your accelerated rules. A friend of mine, fellow podcaster Nikki Beholder to No One, has sort of
Nikki,
mentioned
yes.
and run us through using the system. So I have become more familiar with it, which is why I wanted to make sure I mentioned it, because it is a fantastic. Please scroll down each page for the link and pick this up for your table. Halos and Horns. We might as well do the trifecta of
the third one.
Halos and Horns, please.
Yes, that's a one-page RPG. Halos and Horns. However you slice it, doesn't really matter to me. It's it's a one-pager, kind of like Honey Heist, and the premise is that it's a game for two GMs, an angel and a devil, each trying to coax one player, a mortal, to their side, right? And it's adapted from an improv game that I used to play all the time back when I was in an active troupe that I had a lot of fun with, right? Angel Devil doubleheader is what we called it in my college troupe, and it's a super fast game. It could take anywhere from like 30 minutes, I think, to an hour to 10 minutes if you play it like the improv game that it's based off of, honestly. Maybe even sub 10. But it's super wacky. You've got like two opposing GMs that are like playing this tug of war, right? And like using all the GM tools at their disposal to push the player in the direction that they want to be pushed in. And it's really interesting because the times I've played it and have gotten to watch it, the player actually has a lot of power, even though the GMs are like literal gods, right? Like it's the player that decides who wins, essentially, right? Yeah. At the heart of it, it's a guessing game because each GM has a different objective that they want the mortal to accomplish, and the objectives usually have nothing to do with each other, right? The angel GM might want the mortal to adopt an entire clinic of puppies, right, at a shelter. And the devil GM might want the mortal to booty call all of their exes and hook up with them one by one, right? And it's completely like opposing. And like, that's the fun of it, right? You can like time skip, you can paint the scene, you can introduce NPCs, you can change the weather, right? Like all the GM tools at your disposal to nudge player that direction. And that's basically, if that sounds interesting to you, if it sounds fun, chaotic to you, I recommend picking it up. It's like $3 or something. And I think I have a ton of community copies. This is true for all of my games. There are community copies available for all of them. If you don't know what that means, that's basically free copies of my stuff that the community has donated by buying copies of my stuff. So please don't ever feel bad for just taking free PDFs of my work. Like I'm never going to shame or blame. And please just go for it. It makes me feel happy when people get to play my stuff and interact with it. So,
well, that's what they can play now. What can they play? I say next year. At time of recording this, the end of 2021. So next year, with respect to 2022 and God Killer RPG.
God Killer, my baby. Okay. So the God Killer RPG is a holy punk powered by the Apocalypse game for one player, the God Killer, and one GM, God. And it's set in this like post-apocalyptic, magically irradiated realm where gods have fallen from heaven and walk amongst mortals, right? And they can't be killed except by each other. So gods go around killing other gods, eating other gods, how can we swear on this podcast? I just want to.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure before I went on. Fucking other gods, right? For power, for pleasure, for survival, right? And sort of like in the muck of all of this, with like mortals sort of toiling under the thumb of either oppressive gods or slightly less oppressive gods, or gods who just sort of like dick around and like don't really help people out. Rises the God Killer, who is the first and only mortal in the entire realm capable of killing a god. And that's the premise of the game. And I'm currently really like, I'm working on it. Depending on when this podcast comes out, you may or may not have to cut this part out, but I'm pretty sure you can keep it in because I think it will be announced by then. / I won't be under an NDA or anything like that. It's God Killer is currently part of Magpie Games' Ashcan program. which
All
is like
right.
the program that they use to develop ash cans of games from upcoming creators, right? I believe I think Velvet Glove was an ash can slash I think Rapscallion is also an ash can of Magpie Games, and you can check out the other ash cans that they have by just googling Magpie Games ash can program, right? And I'm very 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 excited to be developing God Killer as an ash can with Magpie, and I'm excited. I'm excited for the core rules to be done. We're looking at maybe like late January, early February 2022 is when the core rules will be done, but it won't be like there won't be a public release probably until spring or summer of 2022,
Okay.
given how the production pipeline of Magpie works. But yeah, God
Well,
Killer.
I'm hooked. I'm there. I'm in. I'm buying it. You've made one sale.
Yes.
One of many.
Yes.
I have
Yay.
no doubt. I'm all over it. So not just producing shows, producing work, but you're also offering yourself. It sounds a very strange way of saying it, but GM tips and things through your Patreon.
Yes.
So would you mind telling us a little bit about how people can come and support you, not just a follow on social media or subscribe to the podcast or the Twitch stream, but how they can support you as an individual and a GM and a content creator?
Absolutely. So I do. Thank you for bringing that up, Adam. I do have a Patreon. It's at the same handle that I use for everything, which is by Connie Chang. Basically, what I offer on Patreon are GM tips and tools for other GMs and for people looking to, I guess, just support me in general, right? So putting like GM tips up on Patreon. I also have like a monthly patron-only live stream of just like GM advice. That's a different topic every time that I call Professor Chang's Tabletop Workshop. We're currently on like lecture 13 or 14 or something. And I always put lectures up publicly on YouTube, like maybe like a week or two after they're streamed live to my patrons. And patrons also get to ask me questions live, which like obviously shapes the direction of the lecture. But every lecture has a different topic. I've like talked about, oh my god, player death, like how to handle PC death. I think was my most recent lecture, as well as like stuff like improv.
Just to clarify, that's PC death, player character death.
Oh yes, oh my god, yes, not like going out of your way to kill your actual player. That would be hilarious. Maybe an April Fool's Professor Chang's lecture. Who knows? Yeah, here's how you actually kill your player. No, yeah, PC death. Thank you for clarifying. Stuff like that. I've also like way back, I think at this point over a year ago, released a series on if you're also interested in building worlds that are non-colonial and anti-Orientalist. I have like a 5-part series specifically on Endake, which is the world for Transplanar that I released through Professor Chang's. That's all available on YouTube, Transplanar RPG's YouTube. I'm very careful about organizing all of our videos into playlists, so just head over to our playlist tab and click the one that makes sense to you. Yeah, aside from Professor Chang's and like GM articles and tips, patrons get like sneak peeks of my games. Depending on the tier you pledge at, you get like free PDFs of my games when they come out, or like discounted PDFs at the very least. You also get like peeks like into work in progresses of like longer games I've done. So I've put several whips of God Killer onto my Patreon already. You get to vote on the next topic of my GM article or Professor Chang's if and when that comes out. And all patrons also get access to my Discord, where I have a monthly patron gaming night. I've recently decided to make this monthly gaming night specifically a Kahoot tournament with like fun facts about like Dungeons and Dragons or like TTRPGs or like weightlifting or like various random interests of mine that vary from month to month. And I do have prizes. So if you show up, you might get some cool like miniatures or like little dice or like stickers or iron-on patches or whatever. So come join the Connie Chang patron community. Tiers start at $3 a month. And I think like the highest is 200 something, but that's like a one person. Someone's already taken it, and I only have one of those available. That's for like a bi-monthly game if you want to play in one that I GM for you and up to 3 other friends of your choice. But other than that, the next highest tier I think is like $25. You get like everything. You also get like a monthly postcard from me. It's like stuff like that. So check it out if that's interesting to you at all. And it's important to me that for 2022 I really start like, I think like giving my Patreon a nice kick in the butt, in the tush, getting some nice good content up there, I think is on my to-do list, is on my resolutions for 2022. Because I've got some good stuff up there already, but I want to really, I think, like refocus and really invest more in my Patreon, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there, and I can see it, but unfortunately other people can't see it, but I can hear it in your voice for sure. The enthusiasm you have for communities. What's it like to have this community and give back to community? And your thoughts on where our community is going?
Mm. You're so good with the good ass questions. Adam coming in with the bap, the 1-2. So community to me is everything. Um, Straight up, like I would not be here. I would not have, accomplished the things that I've accomplished without the support of literally everyone around me who believes in me. And my Patreon is like, I guess, a direct reflection of that. It's like literally people who give me money every month so I can keep doing stuff, right? That's a pretty one-to-one, I think, conversion of like support to resources. And I, for that reason, I'm very grateful to specifically my patrons. All of y'all, like seriously, like I literally can't do this without you, and it means so much to me that you're willing to like give me money every month to like keep doing me and keep doing the things that I care about, right? And it's important to me to be able to like pay that back because I don't take that as granted at all. Like I don't like it's vital to me to be able to pay that back with gratitude and also pay it forward, right? And speaking more broadly, speaking of paying it forward, like the Transplanar communities that we have, the people who tune in every week to watch our streams, as well as everyone in our Discord server, which we very recently made public. So you can come join our Discord server. You can, I believe, like find the post on our Twitter page. And folks who interact with us on Twitter, like the various other like podcast and actual play networks we're a part of, like other streams, other pods that we've become friends with and have gotten to know. Like Nikki's really cool. Nikki's a really cool person. I'm really glad to have met you through this interview framework, Adam, and everyone else who I've been interviewed by / that I've gotten to talk to or play, share tables at, has just been so positive and so amazing, right? And it's been truly incredible and so humbling to see the reception to Transplanar from the community, as well as to my own personal work, right? And I'm so excited to be sharing these spaces with folks that I really like and appreciate and respect. In terms of where I think the hobby, the industry, the communities of TTRPG is going, I think there have always been marginalized people in these spaces, always, right? Like ever since the conception of D&D in the Midwest, which is where I currently am living, right? In like the 70s, I want to say. Don't quote me on that because I'm not actually a TTRPG historian.
We'll just say yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just smile and nod, boys. Smile and nod. There have always been, people of color. There have always been queer people. There have always been women. There's always been trans people, international folks not in the United States, playing tabletop games, board games, always. But I think we, because I don't want to say they, because I am part of those groups, right? Have been getting more and more visibility, and there have been more it's become more and more accessible for us as well, because I wasn't aware of D&D as a thing that I could do and play until like 2015, 2016, which comes on the heels of 5th edition, right? Which kind of, also comes on the heels of like bigger actual plays that have made the hobby more accessible. I would argue that, shows like Critical Role, Adventure Zone, Dimension 20, NADPOD, Dungeons and Daddies, like they make the hobby more visible to more people and introduce more people to the hobby, whether that's through the show or through D&D as the gateway game that they explore other games through, or other games and then D&D or whatever, right? And I think that it's just going to get more and more diverse. I think our hobby is going to have more visibility on more marginalized creators. I think more non-D&D games, like non-D&D shows, more international shows, I hope, are going to, come to the top and get some more visibility, because there's like a truly vibrant like TTRPG community in like Southeast Asia. Like that's huge. Like I've learned that recently, in like the past like maybe half a year, and that's been amazing to see the games and the communities come out of that as well, right? So I think it's going to get more diverse, and I hope that we're going to see, I think, a sea change on an industry-wide level when it comes to actual plays as well, in terms of more equitable rates for performers, and with that, bigger and more sponsorship involvement as well, and higher production value and quality just across the board is what I think is going to happen, and also what I hope will happen. So I'm kind of like marrying the two together, right?
Yeah, definitely. when you mentioned sort of the Southeast Asia, the Fourth Culture from Singapore is a fantastic show. Rumshi's an amazing DM, so definitely want to check out there. I will also put a link to them in the description below this podcast, as well as everything.
Yes, please do.
You do. You mentioned there other systems outside of sort of this amazing platform that D&D has, I won't say created, but definitely supported and helped generate and regenerate for each sort of new crop of players that come through, and DMs and GMs. What systems do you enjoy that are not Dungeons & Dragons? What do you like to play that is outside of the D20 system?
You mentioned Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I love the system of moves. Right, which I think are, like, for me, at the heart of Powered by the Apocalypse games. It's instead of like resolving things through like skill checks, right, or saving throws or whatever, or a D20 roll, moves, right, to literally move the fiction forward in a certain direction. And typically those systems have like 2d6 plus stat, core resolution mechanic, but that's not always true. I am also. I tried. There was like a hot second where I did some research into Savage Worlds, and then I was like, maybe later. I was like, okay, maybe I'll look into this later. And like, Nikki, if you're listening to this, yes, it's exactly what you're thinking of. It was when I was attempting to do a little bit of character creation with you, and I was like, this is really cool. I love that you can sort of just like build a character without class, right? Or like without like prescriptive ideas of what you can and can't do, and just sort of like make a character piecemeal. That's really interesting and appealing to me. I also enjoy what different systems within PBTA have done, like Belonging Outside Belonging games, which were a evolution out of like PBTA games, with the token economy, like weak moves, strong moves, no dice, no masters, right? Are also really interesting to me, those games. And I, as a game designer and as a GM, always looking to sort of like focus on the narrative side of a show, focus on the characters, focus on the emotions first, right? I'm always looking at like other systems and like thinking to myself, okay, what can I take from this system and like either put in my game or like put in my campaigns, right? And how can I like sort of like piece together, sort of Frankenstein together, like a system, an engine, a campaign that works for me, right? Through all the lessons and rules and mechanics that I've learned from other places. Yeah.
As you mentioned there, sort of pulling from other systems. A system that I've enjoyed recently is City of Mist, which is sort of Powered by the Apocalypse base. But the part I like about it the most is the spotlighting. The way it actually has that ingrained into the system. So a player character takes that spotlight for a period of time and embodies it, and then it moves on. And as you mentioned there with the moves, everything keeps moving. The narrative is always changing and evolving, and everybody has their moment to join in and take part. So that's one of the systems I've enjoyed playing recently. So I'm just going to recap everything you do for a minute, because it's amazing. So, streamer, podcaster, producer, game designer, and sort of community, Patreon, supporting other people, and somehow you find time to appear on other streams, which we haven't got to. But do you have time for you? Do you get downtime to relax?
Oh, Adam. Oh boy. So outside of all of this, I also have a job. I work. Yeah. Well, my hours are really low on that job because I make time for TTRPG stuff. So between my TTRPG work and my freelance work, doing narrative design for video games, I do, with what little free time I have, I like to spend it working out. I'm actually going to work out after this recording. It's part of how I like me time, right? Like for me, like working out is a way to get connected with my body, be a little bit more mindful about how I move, and also just get swole, right? So I spend my time working out. I also spend my time playing video games. That's how I decompress. I like to play first-person shooters. I'm actually in the middle of I'm on an aim training regimen because even with my off duty time, I have to be good at what I do. I guess just as an Aries. Yeah.
Yep.
I guess I'm never truly truly relaxing. Even when watching shows, I'm always thinking about the story of the show. Yeah, I know. I'm like, what game can I make from this show? Like, how can I put these plot points into my game? Or yeah.
Well, Transplanar is going to continue to be a fantastic success. I have no doubt, as well as Godkiller when it comes out. As I told you, I'm already on that bandwagon, that train. My wallet is already crying over where I left it.
Kill those gods.
And to give you a bit more free time, just as we bring this interview, this chat to a close, is there anything, because we've covered a lot, and mainly because you do so much and do so much so well, is there anything we haven't spoken about yet you would like to sort of just bring up before we close?
I'm just gonna put this in here.